Hello again, I'm Mary Guinan Darmody of Tipperary Studies and I'm out and about in Thurles with Jimmy Duggan. Today we're discussing something I know very little about, sport, apart from I know Thurles is called the home of the GAA. Jimmy, take us round.
Yes, well, it's probably a path well trodden, and certainly Liam O'Donoghue has done the town proud with two great volumes on the history of the local club, on Semple Stadium and on Tom Semple himself. So I might go a little further, if you like, along the road from the foundation of the GAA, which, by the way, Joe Tobin has also researched very deeply and found that there were far more than seven men at the initial meeting. Anytime I walk down this street, I think of one of the early great days of hurling in Thurles, when the first tournament in 1886, when teams came from all over Ireland, came by train, marched down, bands at their head, and marched out this road out to Thurles, to Hackett's Field. And it was soon apparent that far more spectators came than had been imagined. The rope fences were soon broken down, and the Hackett family and the people around did their very best to feed everybody, which was much appreciated. And then, after the tournament was over, the band once again led everybody back up Slievnaman Road, and this time, instead of turning left for the station, they turned right down to the residence of Archbishop Croke. And Archbishop Croke at this time was feeble enough, but he came out and met the crowd and said, to paraphrase him, that you have planted a great seed today in the story of Gaelic games, which they had, because after that tournament many more clubs sprang up all over the country. Really, Thurles never looked back as the centre of hurling, and that tradition lasted for an awful long time. When All-Ireland winning teams, when they returned to Thurles, they would always go down to the steps of the cathedral to meet the Archbishop. That only stopped in 1980s, I think, for safety reasons.
Crowds were too big, so it was safer in the stadium.
Became too big. But we need time for reflection too, and the GAA Museum.
The project was initiated by the Thurles Development Association and later curated excellently by Liam O'Donoghue and Seamus King.
It is a place to relive memories and look at the great stories of the Gaelic game here in Thurles. It really is a well worthwhile visit.
It is indeed, definitely, I would agree.
The early years were fraught with difficulty for the GAA. His hotel became too small, and they went to the courthouse in Thurles as well.
Our present courthouse.
Yeah, our present courthouse, and some of the exchanges were hot and heavy and physical at times. It was a time of great idealism and so on, but also a time of great difficulty in the early years. The organisation, almost faltered, but never did fully. And then, of course, played such a massive role in the healing of the Civil War wounds and
yes.
all that. And today, one couldn't but be proud of from that very first day.
We have a fine stadium.
Yeah, the field. The big day for the field, I suppose, was in 1926, and when Tip played Cork in Cork, and the pitch was invaded in the Munster Championship, and so it was fixed for the following Sunday here in Thurles. And Tom Semple gathered together a team to ensure that the match would go ahead.
Had the railway much of an input or an influence?
Oh
because,
yes,
you have a ready-made transport
right
system.
through the 50s, 60s, there would be, maybe 23 specials, a special train to the match, and they would all parked, if you like, shunted up to the sugar factory sidings during the game. So if you were to stand on the bridge in Thurles and look out and see all these trains, and then all the workers in Fords, Dunlop Fords particularly, trying to make the last train.
The GAA would traditionally be for, say, males, But would it have had many female followers? Like, would women have been interested in the matches?
I think any of the photos that you would see of the 50s and 60s, it would be very much dark suits, gabardine coats, tan faces, and very few women.
Yeah,
At
that's
the
what I
time.
thought.
Yeah, I remember selling programs on the bank in Thurles in 1958 or 9, and very few. One of the great female characters, of course, that came to Thurles and lit up the whole field at the time was Maggie Barry, the great traditional singer. Her voice would be heard. She would, work her way from the Killiney end. It was all a bank then, bank from cinders actually from the sugar factory, made up the bank, and thousands standing, no seating accommodation at all. And her voice would ring. She had all the great songs, ring across. So, but very few women.
Yeah, you remember my father mentioning her, all right.
Yeah.
So obviously, if he was at a match, he would have heard her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we normally think of Thurles and GAA, but are there other sports associated?
Thurles was sports mad. Certainly in my youth, Thurles was a sports mad town.
Yeah.
For instance, that wonderful job that the Thurles Drama Group have done in
The Breed Ryan Hall.
the Breed Ryan Hall. It was used for many things, silent movies and so on, but we have a great record of a boxing tournament held there in 1921. And remember the RIC barracks was right beside it. It was
Just down the road.
Just right beside it in the entrance. But life went on, and the social club held a boxing match there, and packed, and main bout of the night anyway. After 1 or 2 rounds, the main man refused to come out for some reason, so that people would get their money's worth. He didn't continue to fight, but he gave a number of songs, and so that people felt that they would get their
value.
They'd get the value of the ticket.
Whether he was afraid he was going to be beaten or what, but he decided
I don't know, but
his musical skill was better than his physical skill.
But that was badminton, of course, there. Paddy Doyle and Jimmy Doyle were the great badminton players of the time in the Craddocks. International teams came to Thurles to play badminton and so on. Badminton was a big game in the 70s. Yeah. The hurling, I suppose, dominated everything to a great extent. There was actually one shop just devoted to hurleys alone, Sam Melbourne, and that formed the basis, by the way, of the hurley collection
In the museum.
in the museum.
And actually, we'll give a plug for the library here. When you mentioned Sam Melbourne, we have a lot of his scrapbooks here in Tipperary Studies.
So there was sport everywhere, but this is one that fascinates me actually. There's no doubt in my mind that the glory years of hurling for Tipperary were 1949, 50 and 51. It was a time when people cycled to matches, huge mileage, and just left their bikes on the square, or there were houses on the square that had a business looking after the bikes as well, and every house had plain or meat teas. So in other words, they would supply a plain or meat tea for anybody coming to the games.
A little side industry.
Yeah, hurling was very important business-wise in Thurles. Middle of the 40s, I think, when Cork couldn't avail of Hayes' Hotel for accommodation before a match. They were actually put up by the council in the council buildings. The local council organised beds, and that's where the Cork team slept the night before the match. So hurling was really important in a lot of senses.
Yes.
Here on the post office, Tommy Doyle was the superstar of hurling at the time. He was known as the rubber man because he would bounce up after any tackle. He had won an All-Ireland in 1937. Again in 1945. And they were the only All-Irelands of those decades, more or less anyway. So by the time 1949, Tommy Doyle had 12 years of tough inter-county physical hurling. And so he decided that it was time to retire. So he wrote a letter to the county secretary at the time, Phil Purcell, saying thanks for everything, but I'm going to call it a day.
Hanging up my boot.
He was a boyish figure, Tommy Doyle. He was very, very, he walked down the square and posted the letter. And just as he was walking back up the square, he met Joby Callanan. Joby Callanan lived beside Rooney's tea shop there, just off Friar Street. He was a selector on the Tipperary team, and so Tommy told him what he had in mind anyway. Joby persuaded Tommy anyway to stay, and he went up Vittler's Lane, where a lot of people lived at the time, into the sorting office and retrieved the letter. And the letter never reached the county secretary. Tommy Doyle went on to win 3 more All-Irelands, was the superstar of those 3 years, when hurling reached a pinnacle in Tipperary.
Early 50s?
49, 50 and 51. So hurling was really big. Boxing, we've had, you know, the superstars of boxing to plaques over the town to them, and badminton, soccer. Peter Shilton, great English goalkeeper, played on the Greyhound track in Thurles against a Thurles 11, you know, as a warm-up summer game. Thurles was part of the League of Ireland in soccer at one stage.
In the 70s, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so, yeah.
So that sport was huge, absolutely huge in Thurles.
And that's even before you go down towards greyhound racing or anything like that.
Yeah, the horses.
The horses, yeah. That's another.
Yeah, the stand house was there during the famine, you know. So it's and still is, I think. It still is very much a sporting town. And
even before the stadium then was used for concerts or anything like that. So
yeah, it has played a huge part in Thurles' life from the very beginning.
And there's no evidence that it's going to
change.
No,
I think it's better it's getting. It's better it's getting, isn't it?
Jimmy,
all right.
Thank you for that side of Thurles.
All right, Mary, thank you very much.